Hey everybody, this is Father Warner. The readings for Wednesday of the second week of Lent focus on the prophet Jeremiah. Our first reading is taken from Jeremiah chapter 18, verses 18 to 20. Now, when you think of a prophet, the first thing that perhaps comes to your mind is that he is anointed by God, and therefore he should be flawless, without failings, without sin. And yet we have seen disobedient prophets. Jeremiah was called the weeping prophet, but Jeremiah also gave in to terrible bouts of anger. If you look at our text today, it seems rather harmless. Here are people around Jeremiah who are plotting his death, plotting his downfall. And Jeremiah, it seems, pleads to God and says, look, I have only done good. I have even pleaded for these people to you, and yet they plot my downfall. But then Jeremiah goes on to say some very, very bitter things, and I want to read those to you. He says, therefore, Lord, he says, give their children over to famine, hurl them out on the power of their sword. Let their wives be widows and childless. Let their husbands, he says, die of pestilence. Let their households be destroyed by marauders. Let their youth die in the battlefield, he says. Do not forgive their iniquity. So what made Jeremiah so bitter? You see, when God called Jeremiah, he was a youth. He did not want this job. He told the Lord in so many words, I am a youth. And God still plucked him up from a village and threw him to minister in the cities. God took him from local issues and threw him in the heart of national matters. And Jeremiah became the laughing stock. The people rejected him. We know that they put him in stocks. They threw him in a dungeon, they put him in prison, and they did everything under their power to ridicule him. In fact, Jeremiah tells God, he says, you seduced me, and I got seduced. He never wanted this job. We may tend to judge Jeremiah. How could a prophet, or for that matter, how could the Holy Father, or for that matter, how could a bishop, or for that matter, how could Father Warner or anyone else that we know, that we admire, that we respect, give in to such temper tantrums? We're human. The prophets were human, the popes are human, I'm human, and so are you. And I know we tend to judge people very often based on a momentary lapse. You see, the spiritual life, as I've often said, is not a moment. The spiritual life is a journey. And in our reading that follows, or the text that follows our reading, we see the prophet Jeremiah having a bad time. Maybe you had a bad day today. Maybe you'll have a bad day tomorrow. And what you really want from people is their understanding, not their judgment. In the Gospel, which is taken from Matthew chapter 20, 17 onwards, you see two others who want a job. Jeremiah did not want a job, but James and John want a job. In fact, their mother, let's call her Mrs. Zebedee, comes appealing to Jesus for her boys. Let one sit on your right, let one sit on your left. And Jesus says to them, do you know what you're asking for? Oh, power and position always sounds wonderful. And they say, yes, we know what you're asking for. We're ready to drink that cup of suffering that you have. They must have thought it was a glass of wine. And Jesus gave them martyrdom. Don't hanker for position. If it comes to you, accept it. Many people hanker for position. In parishes, you see this. In parish councils, the clergy amongst each other. If it is God's will, you will get it. If it is not God's will, you might make sure you get it, and you'll bring yourself to ruin and ruin several people with you. When God has set a seal on you, when God has set a seal on ministry, when God has set a seal on work, He will see it to fulfillment. The good that He has begun in you, He will see it to fulfillment. But also careful when you ask God for something. James and John said, we are ready to drink that cup of suffering. Careful, careful, careful when you ask God. You know, many years ago when I was a young seminarian, much more hair on my head, I once told Bishop Bosco, and I remember this so vividly, I was very moved by a person who had cancer. I was a young seminarian, full of wanting to give myself to God in entirety, lots of enthusiasm. And I said to Bishop Bosco, I have been praying, Bishop Bosco, that I get this cancer and this lady is set free. And he looked at me and he said, careful what you ask God for, He'll give it to you. And I want to leave you with that thought. We need to go to God and discern with Him. James and John went to Him on a whim and on a fancy. Jeremiah, on the other hand, didn't want the job, and God still chose him. Continue to discern what God's will is for you this Lent. Bye for now.